Hi everyone, the partial prophet here. Thanks for tuning in. So I wanted to remind you that we know in part and we prophesy in part, and then when Jesus comes, we will see fully. Okay, so today we're going to talk about the Passover connections and second Passover, which we are in right now. Um, so let's do an overview of the year, because I think it's been a very busy year. A lot's been going on. And some of the patterns are being repeated from previous years. For example, okay, so in the first 3 months of this year, we repeated the patterns of the supermoons of 2019. Um, not on the exact dates, but really similar to, like one of the things in 2019, the supermoons were on Jewish holidays. And so we repeated that this year. I mean, we didn't have supermoons this year, but we had we had a small supermoon, the smallest supermoon in February. But we just mostly had full moons in January and March. But they fell on the Jewish holidays, particular dates. And one of the things when I was looking at this, so a lot of times hindsight is like 2020, where a lot of times you could look back at some of the signs and then maybe understand more what they meant based on what happened after them. And so I think that's true about these supermoons because they happened in 2019. And then and they covered the months of January, February, and March, and they were kind of a big thing at the time. And then what was interesting was that a year later, in January of 2020, was when Trump did his quote unquote deal of the century. And then in March of 2020 was when we had the COVID pandemic and the shutdown. Okay. So the supermoons of 2019 could have been signs, like kind of pre-warning us about COVID coming. And so what was interesting in 2020 was that March 11th, which was Shushan Purim in 2020, was when they declared COVID the pandemic. So we have that number 11. And if you understand that 11 stands for judgment, then it kind of makes sense. So we were told on March 11th in 2020 about the COVID pandemic, which was telling us that judgment was coming in the form of COVID. And then, so what we had was the worm moon was 11 months, 20 days before March 11th. So we have that 11 number. And then it was 11 months and 27 days before the shutdown from COVID on March 18th. Okay, so 11's everywhere there. Okay, and then so this year, looking at some of the patterns with the moons, not all the supermoons, but because like I said, February had the smallest supermoon. In January, the wolf moon happened on the 111th day of the war, so I highlighted 11 in that number. In Israel, the war in Israel. And then what's interesting was on January 25th, there was a Jackie Robinson statue stolen, and all that was left was the feet of it. And so that totally connects to Daniel's statue, because I believe we're moving into that sometime this year. We're going to move to the feet of the statue, which I believe the feet kind of represent civil war. And so that was interesting with the statue. And then on the 26th, the day after the wolf moon, was when Trump was ordered to pay 83.3 million to that woman that claimed that he sexually abused her. And so I thought it was interesting with the dollar amount 83.3 is that 83 adds up to 11. So I highlighted that. and that was on the 26th. Now I thought that was interesting. 26 is interesting to me because it adds up to 8. Okay. And so since I believe Trump's the 8th king that is to come to bring judgment, um, that was kind of interesting that that happened on the 26th. Okay. On February 23rd, the snow moon, that's when the U.S. rejected the quote unquote settlements in Israel. Um, and the reason why that's significant is because that means if you're calling um, that land in Israel a settlement, then you don't believe that Israel has a you don't believe that the Jewish people have a right to that land. Um, and so you're believing a myth about the history of the land of Israel. Okay, and I mean, a lot of people believe that's an anti-Semitic view of the land in Israel. Um, so that happened on February 23rd. Um, and then on March 25th, we had the lunar eclipse. That that was when, and see, I think this date is really significant. Is that that's when the UN made a resolution. Um, let me read what it says. Like to force a ceasefire in. I believe it was. Yeah, it was a ceasefire resolution. So trying to force Israel to stop the war in Gaza. Um, and um, what was really interesting about that is it happened on Shushan Purim, which is the second day of Purim. Okay. Which sometimes I think that connects to like America, um, because like the first day of Purim would be like connected to Israel, and then this they talk about Shushan or Susa, um, being um, like I don't know if they would be called like maybe Susa was considered a city with a wall, but I do think the picture of Susa connects to America, like a lot of the prophetic shadows connects to America. Um, and so what's interesting about it is that actually on March 22nd, um, the U.S. tried and failed to pass a UN Security Council resolution, basically putting a stop to the war in Gaza. That was a Biden, you know, uh, initiative trying to get that to happen, or his administration. And then that didn't happen, but then it prompted China, I forget the two countries, China and someone else, to put together this UN resolution on the 25th. Okay. And so what was really interesting is that on the 26th, um, and there's that number again, the 26th, um, is when the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapsed. Okay. And so what I believe is that that was the start of the judgment for these two UN resolutions on the 22nd of March and the 25th of March. Because what happened with this resolution on the 25th is that the US abstained. And usually they can veto something and then it gets dropped. Okay. But instead, the US decided to, basically abstain, which meant that it was allowed to pass. Um, so, um, and the Francis Scott Key Bridge, I think there's a lot of symbolism with the Francis Scott Key Bridge, because he wrote a song, that's, a big part of America's, um, you know, oh, I can't think of that word, but it's important to, like Americana and the 4th of July and things like that. And then when the bridge collapsed, it blocked a port, an important port in America. And that was kind of interesting because Biden, in his State of the Union on March 7th, um, he said he wanted to build this port in Israel to send aid to Gaza. Um, and so it's kind of interesting because I kind of think there's a little bit of judgment too for that. Um, in block, like, you put a port, to feed the gods, Gazans, and God ends up blocking the port in America that you know feeds us Americans. So that was definitely a message from God. Um, and then I do think bridges collapsing are a picture of like people falling from leadership. And then also with the bridge, 6 people were killed and 2 were injured. And so that was on the 26th. So we see those numbers, 6 and 2 again, which add up to 8. Um, so I think that's a foreshadow of judgment coming too with the eighth king. Um, but then so that happened on the 26th, and then like starting with uh, the first week of April, um, there have been fires, not fires, sorry, nonstop tornadoes in the country, in the middle of the country. And so definitely judgment for this UN resolution. So that's what's going on. And then after the first 3 months in 2019, then they had the Notre Dame fire on April 15th in 2019. Okay. And so I mean, it was kind of interesting because when I look at the Notre Dame fire, you have the big spire falling and then there's 2 towers left. And so I think that actually could be a picture of um, the judgment of Biden, because, what I believe is going to happen is that the 2 witnesses, which are Trump and Netanyahu, return, and Biden gets judged, and, I mean, I think he's going to get killed, but he's going to lose his power. The big spire falling would be a picture of him losing his power. So, and then I was looking at the date. So it was on 4/15/2019, and so it would be 4/6/12. And so the 6 and the 12 are kind of interesting because that's 666. So that's kind of interesting. And then this year, and it happened on Nissan 10/11, so you got that 11, which is a picture of judgment. So then this year on April 8th, we had the solar eclipse in North America. And on the Hebrew date, it was Adar, second Adar 29, which 29 adds up to 11. So a picture of coming judgment. And so let's talk about the solar eclipse. So I did a whole video about the meaning of the solar eclipse. And I really thought, I mean, the 8 number really stands out to me in the solar eclipse. The 8 and the 11 stands out on Adar 29. So, but here's some information that so looking at the whole month of April, which I could do now, the solar eclipse was, so the solar eclipse was 8 months after the Saudi deal, which was on 8/9/23. Okay. And that was Biden was trying to get together the Saudi deal. It was announced in the Wall Street Journal on 8/9/23. Okay. So very interesting that the solar eclipse happened 8 months after that. And then, so we see that number 8, and then the solar eclipse was 1 week. Okay, so kind of depending on how you count it, 1 week or 8 weeks inclusive. Like if you count both dates, the starting date and the ending date, you get 8. Otherwise, you get 1 week, which is 7. So I actually think both those numbers are significant, the 7 and the 8. So the solar eclipse was either 7 days or 8 days before Trump's trial starts. Okay, because 7 would connect to the seventh king. Biden is the seventh king. And then you have 8 connecting to Trump when he returns. Because I think that Trump's trial is very significant to the return of Trump. Okay, because when he was found guilty, it definitely brought up a lot of anger and ire in his followers. Okay, so I think they're getting ready for the war, and that was a big part of kind of waking them up and getting them ready. Because when he was found guilty, um, I got in my car and I turned on the radio, and I have conservative radio in my car, and the conservative speaker had said, "Oh, the most terrible thing happened," and I was thinking, like, what? Did an atomic bomb go off somewhere, or an explosion somewhere, or a terrorist attack? And then he said Trump was found guilty, and then the speaker, the conservative speaker too, talked about like he was so angry that um, he wanted to get violent, but he was restraining himself. So there's violence in the hearts of Trump followers. Okay. Um, and let's see. And so I wrote that Trump's trial was 5 years after the Notre Dame fire. So, isn't that kind of interesting? Um, and then, because, let's get the date here. So Trump's trial started on April 15th, so very interesting. Same date as the Notre Dame fire. But it's also the anniversary of the date that the Titanic sunk. Okay. And I think it took a couple days for the Titanic to sunk, but it sank on the 15th. And so that was 112 years ago. So definitely always interesting when things like that intersect. And then we see that the solar eclipse was 6 days, and that's inclusive, counting both the date of the solar eclipse and the date of Iran attacked Israel on 4/13/24. Okay. So could have been somewhat of a warning about Iran's attack, although Iran's attack really wasn't a big deal for Israel. Okay. Yeah, so we'll talk about that on another slide. And the solar eclipse was 10 days inclusive before the pro-Palestinian protesters showed up on 4/17/24. Okay, so that 10 number, that reminds me of the 10 horns. I kind of think the 10 horns are probably a picture of the military. The beast have 10 horns, and I think it kind of connects to the military wing of the beast. And so what I really think is that Biden is the beast from the sea, and he has 10 horns, and we first saw them showing up during the BLM riots in 2020, and then now I believe they returned in these pro-Palestinian protesters on April 17th. So anyways, and we read about that number 10 too, also connects to like it's a time of testing. So I'm trying to think, I'm looking at my calendar to see if anything happened on the 8th that would I don't really see anything, but what I really believe about these protesters is that they're believing the lies about Israel. They're believing the lies about the war in Gaza. And they think the Palestinians are the oppressed people when it's actually the Israelis. Hamas are the terrorists and the Israelis are the oppressed people, persecuted people. And um, so I believe the fact that they're connected to Biden has a lot to do with that. Biden was a big part of promoting the lies about Israel, and I have a whole slide on that, and we'll talk about that. And then what was really interesting too is the solar eclipse was 1335 days from the UAE deal. So in Daniel, we're told that we're blessed if we make it to the 1335. So the UAE deal was like the first peace deal that Trump did. Um, quote unquote peace deal. Um, out of the six that he did. I mean, yeah. Well, six would be counting the deal of the century. Um, so then the UAE deal would actually be the second one. Um, but the five that he did with actual countries, the UAE deal was the first one. Um, anyways, and I mean, I guess I could say, I was blessed to be able to go see the solar eclipse. I drove to see totality. Um, and then, if you're not following Trump, if here on April 8th you're not following Trump during the, solar eclipse, then that's good. You're blessed. So, anyways, so then, I said in my last video, or whichever video it was, I said I think it's possible that the solar eclipse is pointing to the 8th day of Passover, which is April 30th, that, that started on the evening of April 29th, but really nothing significant happened on that day as far as I could see. But we saw that Passover, the first Passover, started on April 22nd, and the 8th day of Passover was on Nisan 22nd. So lots of connections to the number 8, you know. Um, so then, so like I said, nothing significant happened on April 30th. So then I wondered, well, what if Passover is supposed to be 2 weeks? Because we actually read about that Solomon observed the feast at that time, and all Israel with them, a great assembly from the entrance of Hamath to the brook of Egypt before the Lord our God for 7 days and 7 more days, even 14 days. And then it says on the 8th day, so, would that be the 8th day of the second week? He sent the people away and they blessed the king. Then they went to their tents joyful and glad of heart for all the goodness that the Lord had shown to David his servant and to Israel his people. So I put a little chart here. First 7 days would be April 23rd to the 29th. The second 7 days would be April 30th to May 6th. And then the 8th day would be May 7th, which was Nisan 29. And so what was significant about that day, so it wasn't like the Messiah coming back like a thought, but there was a significant event. That's when we had Biden speaking at the Holocaust Memorial Ceremony, like he's a big friend of Israel and a big friend of Jewish people. But then the next day, he went and cut off weapon shipment to Israel. And so so it was interesting because that was on the 7th and the 8th of May. Okay, so very interesting. So we see those 7 and 8 numbers. Okay, like in like sort of twice. And the 29th number too, Nissan 29, which connects, could add up to 11, which connects a judgment. So very significant. So I really think that this is a picture of, I think Biden is the he's the beast from the sea. I believe Trump's the beast from the earth. And then, what God talks about the waters, so I forget which church that is, but he talks about the church that's like hot or cold. And he said, I wish that you were either hot or, pick one of them, don't be both. And so what we have is Biden playing both sides of the fence. He wants to be friends to Israel and friends to Gaza. Um, and, and what is, so he's mixing the hot and the cold waters. And, so he's making the waters lukewarm. So what does God do to lukewarm waters? He spits them out of his mouth. Okay, it makes God sick. Okay, pick a side, be hot or cold. Okay, none of this straddling the fence. Okay. Um, okay, so then, um, let's see, I had a reason why I moved to this. So yeah, the solar eclipse pointing to the eighth king. So this is Daniel's statue. I believe it started with Reagan, who was the 40th president. The counting of the seven kings, or the eight kings, started with Reagan, which was 40 years ago in 1984. Because what's really interesting is Back to the Future, which I'm starting to find more prophetic pictures in there. They talk about Reagan in that movie. Okay, so that's very interesting to me. And so we have Trump being the sixth king. Oh, okay. So here Biden, Laodicea is the church that was lukewarm. Okay, that connects to Biden. And then so we read in Revelation 17 about, okay, the seven heads are seven mountains on which the woman sits, and there's seven kings. Five have fallen, one is, the other has not yet come, and when he comes he must remain a little while. The beast which was and is not is himself also an eighth, and is of the seven, and he goes to destruction. So the eighth king, who's part of the original seven, returns, and he goes to destruction. Okay, so I believe that's Trump. And because what I believe is that God uses Trump and his followers to bring judgment to Joe Biden. Okay, so MAGA would be the people that God uses to bring judgment to Joe Biden and his followers. And then a little while I wrote Biden, the beast from the sea, gets 3.5 years or 42 months. I'm still trying to figure out exactly how to count that. Because today is the let's see where that is. So if you consider Biden like returning to power on November 7th, which is when they said he was the winner in 2020, today would be like kind of the last day of the 42 months, because let's see what it is, because today on June 5th, where do I have that written down, is 42 months and 30 days. Okay. So then, if the Messiah doesn't return by tomorrow, then, maybe God considers his power to be something like, starting on January 7th. I don't really know exactly when the power kind of transferred from Trump to Biden, because Trump was really kind of acting nuts in the last couple months of his presidency, so Biden might have, had kind of gotten power earlier than his, January 20th, his inauguration. So I'm not exactly sure when that would be or when God considered that. And then, God would be counting 42 months from there, to bring the end of Biden. Okay. So that's my confusion about that. What's interesting about Trump is that when he returns, he'd be like the 47th president. Okay, so that adds up to 11. So the 47th president is going to bring judgment to America, and then he would be the eighth king. Okay. So like I said, the 8 and 11 numbers connect to the solar eclipse. And then, let's see. And then we saw with the solar eclipse that Trump actually did a campaign ad the day before, and he made himself out to be the moon of the solar eclipse, which I actually think is really significant, because I think the sun could connect to the Messiah, and then Trump could be the moon that's blocking the sun of the Messiah, especially for Trump followers, that they really kind of look to him as a Messiah type. Because I've actually heard people say, like Trump, save us, you could save us, and stuff like that, where they actually use those words. So that's the solar eclipse. Um, oh, we also see the number 4 with the solar eclipse. There was a 4.8 earthquake in New Jersey 4 days before. In 2020, 8.4 was the explosion in Lebanon, which I considered the start of the fiery furnace in 2020. Like more judgment for Trump's DOC and then his peace plan, quote unquote peace plans. We saw with the solar eclipse in 2024, it was longer totality and more cities than 2017. And it was over 4 minutes totality in some places. So 4 is a lot in a lot of places. So with 4, we see 4 cups at Passover. So maybe kind of pointing to Passover. What's interesting was during Passover in April on the 4th day, April 26th, there's that number again, April 26th. Biden plus 17 nations call on Hamas to make a hostage deal. And so I think that connects to the let my people go message that we read about in the Exodus story. Okay. So that was really significant that it happened in the middle of Passover. Okay. Like put a stop to sacrificing grain offering in the middle of the week. We also saw on April 26th was 83 tornadoes. Just terrible. And gorilla hail. So 83, that's adds up to 11. Judgment. And then we read about in Revelation, it says, one saying to the sixth angel who had the trumpet, release the 4 angels who are bound at the great river Euphrates. And the 4 angels who had been prepared for the hour and day and month and year were released so that they would kill a third of mankind. So I think these 4 angels could be a picture of Trump's people. And so the thing you got to understand about 4 is they connect to the 4 corners of the world, the 4 directions. Okay. And so the 4 angels could be a picture of, like right now we have Trump's people kind of scattered throughout the country, in the 4 corners of the country that are bound. Okay, they're bound by Biden and his followers. Okay, in a metaphorical sense, if that's the right word. Metaphorically speaking, and then so at some point God's gonna release them, or the 6th angel is gonna release them, which is gonna be Trump. And then so it's interesting that they've been prepared for the hour. So they've been prepared for the hour of judgment. Okay, and then it says the day, and then the month and the year. So originally when I wrote this in here, I was actually looking at tomorrow, June 6th, as a possible day for the hour of judgment, because you can get 666 out of June 6, 2024. Okay, because you have this June is 6, and then it's the 6th day. And then if you take 24 out of 2024, you can add that up to 6. So I thought that is a possible date. But now I'm looking at a new date, and I'll talk about that later. And then they were prepared for the month. And so maybe because tomorrow's 1 month after the 42nd month of Biden, maybe that's a possibility of the month. And then the year, what's really interesting too is that tomorrow is the 80th anniversary after D-Day. Okay, so there's a lot of for June 6th, there's a lot of connections to 8, a lot of connections to 6, 6 and 6. So that's why I was looking at that date. Like June 6th is actually 60 days from the solar eclipse. But then while I was making this video, I started looking up at June 12th. So I don't really know. I mean, we'll know in like 24 hours when June 6th is over if nothing happened. Okay. But there's a lot of reasons maybe June 6th could be significant for the return of the Messiah. But then I found some good things about June 12th. So we'll talk about that. And then also with the solar eclipse, the first one was 2017. So we got that seven number, and there was 7 years between the eclipses, and then Biden is the seventh king. So like the second eclipse showed up during this time of the seventh king. And then, like I said, on May 7th was when Biden spoke at the Holocaust Memorial ceremony. What the other thing that's interesting about June 6th tomorrow is that it's IR 29. Okay, so look at the top of the slide. The solar eclipse was on IR 29. When Biden spoke at the Holocaust Memorial ceremony, that was Nissan 29. And then tomorrow is IR 29. So 3 29s in a row. Okay. As I kind of look at 29 connecting to 11. Okay. So actually, tomorrow, this is another reason why tomorrow is a possibility. But we'll see what happens. Is that IR could be, it's the second month, but you could also count it as the ninth month. It depends on which new year on the Jewish holiday you start counting. So it could be a ninth month. So that would make, and if you consider 29 to be a type of 11, so tomorrow would be a type of 9/11. Okay. So, maybe we'll see judgment on Biden, but maybe he's going to do something because he does a lot of stuff on 9/11 dates. Okay. So it'd be interesting to see what he does on the 80th anniversary of D-Day. So waiting to see what happens. Okay, so then moving into the month of May of this year we saw the Northern Lights. Okay, we're kind of a big deal in May. Okay, especially because they moved south. Okay, what's really significant to me about that is that if you understand the civil war in Israel, okay, so um in the beginning of the Bible, when you read about Israel, there's a time, like, I'm trying to think what book it was. We read about Israel gets divided into a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. I think that's in the book of Kings, and maybe the book of Chronicles is where well, yeah, definitely, because Kings, we read a lot about the king of the north and the king of the south. Okay. Because Israel was divided up into a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. Okay. And the southern kingdom in that story actually really had the rightful place of leadership, and the northern people were the ones that were really rebelling. So I connect today, and so there's always a repeat of history. So right now I believe that Biden is connected to the southern kingdom of Israel, and that Trump and his followers are connected to the northern kingdom. Because even though Biden is not that great of a person, God allowed him to return to power in the election. And so he didn't steal the election, but Trump's followers believe that he did. And so then they're the rebellious ones over the rightful leaders. Okay. I mean, because we got to trust that God's going to bring his judgment when he's good and ready. Okay. And there's a reason why, I mean, having an evil leader is a big part of, like, how God brings judgment. Okay. But at some point, he lets the evil leader do up to a certain amount of evil before God brings judgment on that person. And so with the Northern Lights coming down into the south of the country, we see a picture of that civil war where we have the people in the northern, part of the country, or the northern part of Israel fighting with the southern part of Israel. Okay. And so it'd be Trump's followers fighting with Biden's followers. Okay, so it's a picture of the Civil War, seeing the northern lights coming down to the south. Okay, it's interesting that it started on May 10th because, like I said, that number 10 connects to the 10 horns. And so Trump has his quote unquote 10 horns. Um, Even though we don't read about it, we don't read about it, like specifically connected to the beast from the earth, but we read about it in, I think it's Revelation 17, where it's talking about um, seeing. The thing about prophecy is that we see dual fulfillments. Okay. Um, oh, well, it's a continuation of the verse. Let's see, from here where it says Revelation 9:14 to 15. No, not that one. I think I talk about it later, but it's Revelation 17. It says the beast which was and is not is himself also an eighth and is of the seven, and he goes to destruction. The next verse, Revelation 17:12, says the 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received the kingdom, but they receive authority as kings with the beast from 1 hour. So that would be Trump's followers, that God allows them to have authority to bring judgment. Okay. So they're given power, just, for the sheer purpose of bringing judgment. Okay. Okay. And so then, so then this slide I talk about what happens in May. So May 6th was the 42nd month after 11/7. And on that day, Biden threatened Netanyahu about going into Rafah. Like even threatening Netanyahu, like, I think the day before that, we actually saw Kamala Harris said that they were actually threatening. Yes. Oh no, that was actually on March 3rd. Oh no, that's not the right. Let me find my mate. Okay. Well, I don't know if I'll be able to find it, but at some point, Kamala Harris was saying that there will actually be consequences for Israel if they go into Rafah. So I can't find the date. Anyways, so Biden was threatening Netanyahu about going into Rafah. On May 7th, Biden, like I said, he spoke at the Holocaust Memorial Ceremony. That was the day that Israel actually went into Rafah. And they were blown, like finally starting their military. They kind of got to the point where they were tired of waiting for a ceasefire thing to happen, and tired of waiting on Biden's permission and all that kind of stuff. I mean, because let me think. Yeah, because he was threatening Netanyahu, and because he was saying he was going to halt shipment of weapons, they finally just said we're going to go into Rafah, and they were blowing shofars before they went into Rafah. So that's a very significant date. Okay. On May 8th was when Biden said he'll halt shipments of weapons to Israel. Very interesting that happened on VE Day, which is Victory in Europe from World War II. So, I mean, it's always interesting when you put these on the calendar. Significant things happen from significant days of the past. Okay. May 10th was when U.S. says Israel's use of U.S. arms likely violated international law. Okay, so there's a lot of lies about Israel, okay, coming from the U.S. And then that's the day we started seeing the Northern Lights in much of the U.S. Okay, what's interesting about the Northern Lights in May 10th is that was 22 years, 8 months from 9/11. Okay, so we see the 22 is a type of number that connects to 8. Okay, because the Jewish holidays go from the 15th to the 21st, and then the 8th day would be on the 22nd. So that's a type of 8. Okay, so definitely, God's using these northern lights to warn us about the 8th king coming. okay, and that it's connected to 9/11, okay, um, because it's a type of civil war. Um, I mean, we saw in 9/11, we saw the North Tower and the South Tower. Um, Anyways, and then on May 14th, we have the 76th year of Israel. Like, it's interesting because I kind of put a bunch of stuff on my slides, but there is so much more because Israel had a bunch of holidays going on in May, um, where they were celebrating their Independence Day, um, and, like, well, I mean, we already talked about Memorial, Holocaust Remembrance Day. But there's so much that doesn't end up in these slides, and it's been crazy. There's a million things going on all at the same time, a lot of overlapping of holidays. I always think it's interesting when the Christian holidays overlap the Jewish holidays, um, so that's very interesting. On May 19th was Pentecost. Very interesting about that date. So that would be the Christian Pentecost. So that means 50 days from Easter. What was really interesting about that was when Raisi, the president of Iran, died in a helicopter crash. Because of the foggy weather, okay? Because of the cloud. So that is kind of interesting. And then on May 20th was when the ICC had arrest warrants for Netanyahu, other leaders of Israel, and then also Hamas. So you're seeing how the world is either making them equivalent, um, or making Israel out to be the aggressor. And then on May 22nd was the start of the second Passover. Now, what was significant about that day? So I'm calling them the sin nations, okay? Because it's interesting that you have Spain, Ireland, and Norway, okay, doing this. And so they would be like the first Western nations. I mean, we've had a lot of other nations before that were recognizing a Palestinian state. But these would be like the first, big Western nations that are doing it. Okay. So that started on May 22nd, which is, I mean, kind of like the eve of the second Passover. Okay. And so I think what's significant about that is I think that connects to Peter denying Jesus 3 times. Okay. The three nations. And and so Peter denying Jesus 3 times connects to the rooster crowing, okay, which means like we could be very near the end of time, okay, the end of this, like, what's a good way to say it, the end of this season, and then maybe moving into the Messianic kingdom, okay. So maybe this is a sign, a big sign, is when we see 3 Western nations recognizing a Palestinian state, then we're very near to the rooster crowing. Okay. The other thing that happened on May 22nd, so there's been a ton of tornadoes, but this one stood out to me because it was called Temple, Texas. Okay, so I thought that was kind of interesting. Like connected to God's temple. There was 120-mile winds. So we know 120 connects to judgment too, because, in the flood story in Genesis, God says, I'm only going to give them 120 days and then judgment. Okay. So that's interesting. On May 24th was when ICJ, which is the top UN court, orders Israel to immediately halt the Rafah offensive. Okay. And I mean, the thing about ICJ is that Israel isn't really connected to them. They don't have to follow them. They're not a member or anything like that. What's really sad about this whole thing is that all these things like the UN, the ICJ, and the ICC, they came out of World War II. And so people thought it'd be helpful to have these world bodies come together to try to prevent another thing like World War II with Hitler and the Nazis happening. Okay. So they started out good, but now they're all like completely on the wrong side of history and completely against Israel. Okay. So just kind of this big um, turnaround. Um, and I mean, it's interesting. There's some prophecy where God's like talking to Israel, and it says all your friends have like turned against you. Okay. Um, so that's what we're seeing in our day and age in these last days. Okay, on May 25th, Italy said it would restore funding to UNRWA. Okay, so that's the Relief Workers Agency of the UN. So, um, so the truth is that we've seen how, and this is because Hamas has a lot of money, especially coming from the country of Qatar or Qatar. Is there's just a lot of money, and so then it's easy for them to buy off like the UN workers. Um, um, but also probably they have bad hearts too. Um, um, so that's why, this relief agency, there was a lot of people that were connected to Hamas and actually were part of the invasion on October 7th. Okay, so, just another one of those things that's started out with good intentions and now has turned completely evil and wicked. Okay, on May 27th, um, the EU met to discuss sanctions on Israel. I mean, all these things are just, Israel. Everyone's turning against Israel. May 28th is the official date where the Sin nations, like I said, Spain, Ireland, Norway, formally recognize a Palestinian state. Okay. May 30th was when Trump was found guilty on all 34 counts. Gantz submits his bill. Oh, that's when Gantz, okay, so this is in Israel. Benny Gantz, he submits a bill to dissolve the Knesset. Okay, basically to dissolve Netanyahu's government. Like he is trying to get rid of Netanyahu. Okay. Um, and so it's interesting because I think the 30th is the day that we saw the two witnesses like officially die. Trump's found guilty. Gantz is trying to get rid of Netanyahu. Um, so we read about the two witnesses dying, and I put quotes dying, metaphorically speaking, in Revelation 11. Okay, but then they resurrect. Okay. What's interesting about May 30th is that was the 70th day after Biden's UN resolution. So what's interesting is that I think all this work that people are doing to try to get rid of Trump and try to get rid of Gantz ends up backfiring on them, and actually ends up causing them to have more power than previously. Okay, so it's kind of like the gallows that was built to kill Mordecai ends up um, allowing Mordecai to get power. Okay, like Haman in the book of um, Esther ends up actually getting killed on his own gallows that he built for Mordecai. Okay, so all these things could backfire. Okay, um, then on May 31st was when Biden did his speech. Okay, and so he actually made comments about Trump's being found guilty and just a huge peace and safety thing about Israel. And, so basically he was commenting about both the two witnesses. Okay, so kind of very interesting. So first of all, I see it as a peace and safety message. The the thing that's significant about Biden's speech is that he did it when Israel was observing the Sabbath, so they couldn't say anything about it for a while. It Biden's trying to make himself look good, like he's the big peace broker in Israel, and the fact that he did it like he claimed that Israel had submitted this proposal. Israel says, no, we didn't. And so I think Biden's like trying to set up this thing to, somehow get Netanyahu, like, one, making it look like maybe Netanyahu is lying when it's actually Biden who's lying, and then causing a bunch of people to put a lot of pressure on Netanyahu, to agree to this peace thing with Hamas. I mean, the thing you got to understand is that Israel can't make, okay, I mean, Hamas wants Israel to just stop fighting with them, so they could rise back to power. Okay, well, I mean, that's a non starter for Israel because they can't allow Hamas to continue their terrorism. Um, so I mean, there's no way those two groups can can make a peace treaty. I mean, it's just impossible. I mean, you have terrorists wanting to continue to be terrorists. But Biden keeps making promises that he can do it, and it's all political. It's all campaigning on Biden's part. Um, but it's just not good. Um, so um, so I actually made these slides because I actually thought something might happen on May 7th, and so I kind of did a bunch of counting for May 7th. And but then that was the day that Biden spoke at the Holocaust Memorial Ceremony. So it did end up being kind of a significant date. Oh, and the date that Israel went into Rafah. So definitely a significant date. It was 42 months, one day from 11/7, which was when Biden was declared the winner. And like I said, 5/6 is 42 months of Biden. May 6th. Oh, sorry, I got confused. So May 6th is actually the 42-month date of Biden. And then, because we read about the court of the Gentiles are trampled for 42 months. Okay, so that's Biden and the left trampling America for 42 months and basically making a mess of America. And they have been, In Revelation 11:2, we read, leave out the court which is outside the temple, and do not measure it, for it has been given to the nations, and they will tread underfoot the holy city for 42 months. So the Gentile court outside the temple could be a picture of America. Okay. The beast from the sea gets 42 months. Biden is most definitely the beast from the sea. In Revelation 13:5, when we're reading about the beast from the sea, it says, there was given to him a mouth speaking arrogant words and blasphemies. So that would be his lies. Well, arrogant words would be all the great things he claims about himself, Biden. And then the blasphemies would be all the lies that Biden says about Israel. Okay. And then, so there was given to him a mouth speaking arrogant words and blasphemies, and authority to act for 42 months was given to him. Okay. So good news, there is actually a time frame, a time limit on Biden's, power. Okay. May 7th was also 7 months, one day after Hamas's attack on Israel. I mean, it would be like, if you're just counting month to month, October 7th to May 7th would be the 7th month. Okay. So that's interesting that Israel switched from, that they actually, on the 7th month of this war, actually finally started going into Rafah. And they were actually doing pretty good there. So, and then May 7th was 9 months, 11 days from Tisha B'Av, which is the 9th of Av. That was on 7/27/23, so a 9/11 date. May 7th was 9 months, 6 days from 8/2/23, which was Tu B'Av. 40 weeks. So Tu B'Av is the holiday of love. Okay. Okay, so then May 7th was also 30 days from the solar eclipse, 62 days from Biden's State of the Union. 1335 days from 9/11/2020, which was the Bahrain deal, quote unquote, which was the second normalization deal. 70 weeks, 1 day from 1/3/23, which was when Biden did 2 actions on abortion. The 21st day of protest, the 25th day from Iran's attack. Okay, so the 24th day of Iran's attack would be May 6th. Those 24 numbers and 6, it's kind of interesting. On May 7th, 2012 was when Putin became president of Russia. See why I thought this would be a significant date, you know? Um, it it was the third day after Orthodox Easter, which was on May 5th. In 1945, Germany surrendered on May 7th through the 8th, which was 79 years ago. And then May 7th is also Nisan 29 on the Hebrew calendar, which was 1 year after the hybrid solar eclipse near Australia, 2 years after the partial solar eclipse. This is on the Hebrew date. 2 years after the partial solar eclipse and the black moon. 3 years after the Iran Natanz fire. 4 years after Trump's disinfectant remark. And then Buchenwald was liberated on this date 79 years ago. So, definitely significant. Okay. And then also what I wanted to point out too was we've been kind of in this Easter Passover time frame. Because what's interesting is that the regular Easter, was kind of early. It was on March 31st. And then the Orthodox Easter was kind of late on May 5th. Okay. So March 31st, kind of the end of those 3 months, we had Easter for the last date. And then in April 22nd to the 29th was when we had Passover. And then, so in April, and then in May we had the Orthodox Easter and then the start of the second Passover. Okay. And then here's the breakdown of Passover too. So the Jewish people, we read about this second Passover concept in the Torah. God gave them a second week in case, a second date to do Passover in case they were unclean from a dead body or whatever. So he gave them a second Passover. And the Jewish people only kind of recognize it for 1 day. Okay. But if you take the same patterns from the regular Passover, okay, so Passover number 2E would be May 22nd. Then the first 7 days would be May 23rd to May 29th. And then taking over that concept that we read about where there was a second set of 7 days, that would be May 30th to June 5th. Then that would make the 8th day of the second Passover June 6th, which is tomorrow. Okay, so that's another reason why I think tomorrow's a significant day. That could be connected to the 8th day. So we'll have to wait and see what happens on June 6th. And like I said, 6/6/24 can be parsed out to be 666. Then what I think is now we're in June and we're moving into this fiery furnace kind of phase. Okay. Because on June 1st was when the Corral fire started in California. Corral, I don't know if I'm saying that right. And then, so this is definitely kind of a flashback to the fiery furnace in phase in 2020 because we saw a lot of fires in the West and especially in California in 2020. And then at the same time fires were happening in Israel on June 1st of this year. Okay, so that fiery furnace phase started, like I said, on 8/4/2020, August 4th. Then we saw on June 1st of this year, Hezbollah had, shot a series of rockets over northern Israel. then, oh, see, and I didn't put that because I just added this to my calendar on June. So on June 2nd was when the Hezbollah rockets started causing fires in northern Israel. Okay, just causing a lot of damage in northern Israel. So definitely we're in a fiery furnace phase. So then on June 1st, we saw that. Okay, so here's another organization. The World Health Organization, like decided to give Palestinian rights on June 1st. Okay. Um, so crazy, crazy, crazy. And then Netanyahu finally got to make a statement about Biden's, peace and safety thing. And he said permanent ceasefire is a non starter for Israel, was one of the things that he said. So then, like I said, June 2nd was, fires in northern Israel caused by Hezbollah rockets. On June 3rd, was, well, so now this I'm not really sure about because I just saw a picture today where the 6 planets aligned on June 1st. So I'm not sure the official date of the 6 planets aligning, but they, the first couple days of June. Okay. So we see that 6 number there that connects to Trump. And then what's interesting too was June 3rd was when the Hunter Biden trial began. And then, so then what's interesting about today, June 5th, is that it's the 50th day. Okay, so I call those protesters, the pro-Palestinian protesters, the locusts. Okay, and today's would be like the 50th day. They are still doing what they're doing. Okay, and it spread around the world too. It wasn't just in America. Okay, and then like they're actually starting to go into museums and actually causing damage in museums and stuff like that. I mean, they're just really evil, wicked people. So today would be the 50th day of them because we read about the locusts that get, like the beast comes out of the abyss and then all these locusts come. I think that's somewhere in Revelation. When the locusts have 5 months to do their damage. Okay. So that number 5-1 could connect to, so like I said, I think these are the same people that we saw, the BLM protesters in from 2020. And they actually started doing what they were doing on May 26th. So the 5th month could connect to that May date. Okay. And I wasn't really clear for me how long they were around in 2020 after May, but kind of like after Biden got elected, we didn't really see him as much anymore. I mean, they still showed up, but since they kind of got their presidential candidate, I think they weren't as motivated to do their thing. I mean, I could be wrong, but that's what I'm thinking. So they kind of died down after Biden got elected. So I don't know if there's actually 5 months in 2020 where you consider that they were active. But then the 5th month could connect to the 50th day this year of locusts. Okay. But we'll see what happens if things don't happen tomorrow. I mean, they could continue, for a couple more weeks or whatever. We'll see what happens. So then, other dates this month which are important. Okay, so then, like I said, I was thinking tomorrow is a significant date because you get 666. But then I looked at Shavuot and I was like, oh yeah. So Shavuot is actually on June 12th. Okay. And so that's, they count the Omer for 50 days. That's the Jewish type of Pentecost. Okay, the Jewish 50th day. Okay. And it's actually when the Jewish people celebrate the giving of the Torah at Sinai. Okay, lots of prophetic shadows to Jesus being the word that we read about. Okay, so so it could be that. I mean, but then it'd be kind of weird because it says nobody knows the day or the hour, and it's like, well, Shavuot has a lot of shadows about Jesus returning. Okay, um, and so what's interesting about that date on the Gregorian calendar, it's June 6, 2024, and so it's 6/12. Okay. Now if you remember when Trump first made his announcement that he was going to be moving the embassy to Jerusalem, it was on it was 12/6 in 2017. Okay. So it'd be really kind of interesting if, so the date of 6/12 could actually connect to 12/6. I mean, you get 666, you can parse 666 out of 6/12 too. Okay. And it's also Sivan 6 on the Jewish calendar, so you have that number 6 there. Sivan is either the third month, so it's 3/6 or 6/3, or the 10th month, 10/6 or 10/3. And then the so actually a couple days later on June 14th is Trump's birthday. That's when he turns 78, and so that's a possible date, because you have that for in 78 it would be like a picture of going from the seventh king to the eighth king. And then the 14th is also Sivan 8. Okay, so you have that number 8 there. Okay. June 18th is another this is why no one knows the day or hour, because we see these dates and go, ooh, maybe it's going to happen on this date, but then you find another day like, well, but there's a lot of interesting stuff on this date. On the 18th is actually 1335 days after Trump's Sudan deal in 2020, that he did on October 23rd in 2020. And then June 23rd is the Orthodox Pentecost. Okay, so definitely very interesting. I mean, so kind of makes me think that maybe we're definitely going to be wrapping things up this month, because then we're kind of at the end of the Easter, Passover, Pentecost season, on June 23rd. But then you're also moving into summer, like June 21st is the start of summer, okay? And I really think, like in the Bible, the Exodus happens in spring, so it kind of has to wrap up before the 21st, I think, so so we'll see. And then so I said I was going to talk about the Passover connections. So it's been interesting to me because I think we've been fulfilling a lot of the Passover connections in the Bible, and the Holy Week connections, in the Gospels. Okay. So that's why I think we've kind of been more in kind of this general Easter Passover season. Okay, not just the specific dates, but just kind of in general over the last several months. Okay. So on 4/13/24, so remember before the okay, so we read about the Exodus in the Torah, okay, and actually in the book of Exodus. And so that's when they had the 10 plagues in Egypt. Okay, well, if you remember, we're in the second greater Exodus, okay? And so we're going to have a lot of the patterns and shadows from the first Exodus, but in a greater way, okay? And so a lot more plagues, and the plagues now, instead of just in the one country of Egypt, they're around the world, because God's people are kind of around the world. We're in slavery in all the countries that God sent us to. Okay. So on 4/13 was when Iran had their drone and rocket attack against Israel. So I think that could be a picture of like the fiery hail that we read about in Exodus. Okay, Because what's interesting about the fiery hail, out of the 10 plagues, is there was no hail in Goshen, and so we actually saw with Iran, with its attack on Israel, that Israel, really didn't get that much damage. Okay. So that was kind of interesting. And then we read the next plague, I think, is the locust. Okay. And so on 417 is when we saw those pro Palestinian protesters come out. And that's why I call them locust. Because the locusts kind of get in everywhere and they eat everything. But there was another plague that I thought they connected to like the frogs, okay, because it talks about the frogs get in everywhere too, like in your bowl and you know, um, but I mean they could be kind of two plagues that are pointing to like the same thing, okay. Um, and then what's interesting too about locusts is we've had the cicadas are coming out this year. There's two types of cicadas that are coming out from the ground. Um, I mean, this is actual literal cicadas. Um, and they're just kind of everywhere and kind of obnoxious. You know, um, so there that's going on now. And then on 426, um, um, oh, I it kind of looks like I'm saying the cicadas came out on 417. No, I just kind of stuck it under this category of locusts. I don't know the exact date when they started coming out. Um, and then on 426, on the first Passover, day 4, that's when I said Biden and the 17 nations call on Hamas to make a hostage deal. So we're seeing the let my people go happen in the middle of Passover. Um, And then we read about in Exodus how God makes a mockery of the Egyptians. Okay, so one of the things um, that we got to remember, um, well, okay, so God, when He's sending these plagues, He's using them to make a mockery of His enemies. Okay, and so we saw Biden was called an old man. Um, that was connected to his document, case. Um, he didn't get convicted or anything. He just got called an old man. Um, and then what's interesting too is the pier that he set up in Israel got ripped apart by sea waves. Okay. Um, you know, I mean, the whole thing is this whole big fiasco. I mean, kind of like what Biden did in Afghanistan is, I mean, because Biden's trying to appease the people that don't want war. He's setting up this pier to, or he set up this pier to try to feed the Gazans, and then he was saying we're not going to have any boots on the ground. But then when the pier got torn apart, um, the American soldiers couldn't, step on the ground to, bring it back and set it up, and so they had to hire people. I mean, and it's costing us a fortune. It's just a, a terrible sham of a thing. And then the other thing we saw, God making a mockery of the Egyptians is that Iran's attack on Israel is a bust. Okay. And then the other thing we got to remember about the plagues is God uses them to judge the gods of Egypt. Oh, I should have made that a small G. Um, um, and and so I mean, I just have this short little list, but I'm sure it's bigger. So one of the things we got to keep in mind is that if God's judging the gods of the world, the false gods of the world, in the time of Egypt, all the plagues happened in Egypt, and God was judging the Egyptian gods. Well, now God's going to be judging the gods around the world. Okay, and so we're gonna see more than just the 10 plagues. We're gonna see more different plagues. As God, goes to judge, all the different gods, around the world. Okay. Um, so it's a greater exodus, okay, greater plagues. And God uses this to show his power. Okay. So what was really interesting is we saw um so Reed Timmer, who's a storm chaser, has this one video of the windmills, like maybe in Kansas or Oklahoma or something like that, being ripped apart by a tornado like they were toothpicks. Okay. And you had these windmill parts like flying around and stuff like that. So God judging, those people that worship the windmills and the climate change and wind and what all. Um, and then so this list is not complete by any chance. But one thing I thought was interesting is that I saw a video of watermelon sized, I mean, seriously, watermelon sized hail in China on the fifth day of Passover. And they had a tornado too in China on this day. Um, so very interesting. Um, and then the other thing that we're seeing that connects to the Passover and the Exodus story is the slavery that we see on God's people in Israel and America and really around the world, because there's a lot of countries that are being run by evil dictators or like um um like a lot of gangs and thugs rising up and stuff like that. Now, in Israel, because of the war going on, a lot of people had to leave their homes in both northern and southern Israel, and they're like living in hotels and stuff. So they're not able to return back to their normal life, so they're living a type of slavery, um, outside of their homes, and then in America, we're having Biden spend all our money, and so we're like enslaved to the left and their policies that like this, the slavery picture even continues where the cities are falling apart now and crime has risen, because of these the democratic policies. So now, we're kind of a slave to the rising crime. I mean, you could do a whole video on just how we're kind of enslaved. Also kind of the supply chain shortages are creating more slavery for us, et cetera, and so on. Anyways, so I wanted to put this in here. This is the Merriam-Webster's definition of bully, okay, because I think this connects to the pro-Palestinian protesters. Okay, it says to treat someone in a cruel, insulting, threatening, or aggressive fashion. To act like a bullied her younger brother. But number 2 really connects to cause someone to do something by means of force or coercion. Okay, they were bullied into accepting their offer. Okay, so that's I mean, when I read this, I said this really connects to the pro-Palestinian protesters because they were saying like, we don't want to leave these college campuses until they do what we want. Okay. Well, that's a bully. When they're trying to coerce you, force you into changing your mind when you don't want to, that's a bully. Okay. And I mean, a lot of people keep talking about, the Second Amendment and they need to be able to be heard. Okay. Well, my view on, I mean, I'm kind of a protester against protest, because I just don't believe they're righteous at all. But um, you know, I mean, but I do believe in the right to have your voice heard. Um, but I don't believe in violence. I don't believe in occupying. I don't believe in interfering with, you know, I mean, I kind of think a more righteous way, is to write letters and stuff like that. You know, I mean, just making your voice heard and then moving along, is really what I believe in. Um, and so, you know, not staying longer than a couple hours, do some flyers and you're there for a couple hours and then you move on and let people get on with their lives. Um, I mean, because out of that comes this like self righteousness where they think they know the truth when they really don't. They don't know that they're um being deceived. Okay. Especially about Israel. I mean, they think they're supporting the true oppressed people, and they're not. They're on the wrong side of history. Um, and so then some of the Holy Week connections is we see the Judas story, like this story is like repeated all over again. Okay, so one of the things was on 3/3, Gantz went to DC to talk to the Biden administration. So we see kind of like Gantz trying to work with the Biden administration. Like I think Biden and his administration are, trying to help Gantz get Netanyahu out. So Gantz is, really turning against Netanyahu. Um, and so 4 weeks before Easter, Gantz did that, was in DC. It was 70 weeks, 4 days after the maritime agreement. Um, so the 70th week after the maritime agreement. And 530 was, I already said this, that's when Gantz submitted his bill to dissolve the Knesset. Interesting that that was 70 days after Biden's UN resolution. Um, so we see the 70th week from Daniel connected to putting an end to sin and all that kind of stuff. So they think, they're getting rid of, that they're, by doing what they're doing, that they're putting an end to sin and all that kind of stuff. So what we read about, so kind of prophetical shadow of Judas, we read about in Psalm 41. It says, even my close friend in whom I trusted, who ate my bread, has lifted up his heel against me. And we've also seen, Biden acting like a type of Judas, to Netanyahu in Israel. The other Holy Week connections are Trump's testimony in his trial began on Passover Eve. So on Holy Week we saw the trial of Jesus, and so I think Trump's trial is fulfilling some of the prophecies in Jesus's trial. And then we saw the college protests turned into rioting on the first day of Passover. So in the Holy Week they said, they didn't want to arrest Jesus because they didn't want to cause a riot, Okay, and then the Belshazzar connections, hopefully I got the right name, is from Daniel. The story in Daniel, I'm looking it up right now. Daniel, it's either 3 or 6. Actually, that's not true. Those are the two chapters that connect to the lion's den and the fiery furnace. But Belshazzar, I definitely think Biden is fulfilling the Belshazzar prophecies, because Belshazzar is the king that sits around drinking all the wine. Belshazzar, Daniel 5. Okay. And one of the things with Belshazzar, so he's the one who's drinking all this wine out of the vessels of the temple. And then while they're doing that, this hand comes out and writes on the wall, kind of a supernatural hand, so he's the writing on the wall kind of guy. And so they get Daniel to interpret the writing on the wall. And one of the things that Daniel says to Belshazzar is he said, let's see, O king, the Most High God granted sovereignty, grandeur, glory, and majesty to Nebuchadnezzar your father, and because of the grandeur which he bestowed on him, all the peoples, nations, and men of every language feared and trembled before him. Whomever he wished he killed, and whoever he wished he spared alive, and whomever he wished he elevated, and whomever he wished he humbled. But when his heart was lifted up and his spirit became so proud that he behaved arrogantly, he was disposed from his royal throne, and his glory was taken away from him. So what I think is that, for Biden is the, Racy's death is a writing on the wall for Biden, because Racy got so arrogant and they attacked Israel, and so God kills them in a helicopter crash, and that's a warning to Biden of like, don't mess with Israel. Okay, Trump's conviction could be a warning to Biden. Okay. The Hunter Biden trial could be a warning to Biden. Okay. Um, and then the writing on the wall. I think there's so much that's like writing on the wall for Biden that he's missing. Okay. Um, but one of the things we see, like I said, the bridge collapsing is, a warning to Biden that his power is about to fall. Um, and then the fact, okay, so then, we had the bridge fell, and then after that, we've had nonstop tornadoes for 9 weeks as of 6/4. So judgment for these UN resolutions, that's definitely writing on the wall for Biden. But everyone blames tornadoes and stuff on climate change instead of knowing that God's sending a message. God's saying, don't mess with Israel, okay, or you get judgment. And then, like I said, the fire starting in California at 6/1 could be writing on the wall for Biden. I thought it was interesting. There's 6, 7, 8 connections. So in in March, we saw on March 6th was when Nikki Haley dropped out, and so that made Trump the probable nominee. Interesting that it's number 6. And then on the 7th was when we saw Biden do a State of the Union, so that connects to the 6th king and the 7th king. But then we saw in May, on May 6th, that's when Biden was threatening Netanyahu about Rafah. On May 7th, he's the 7th king. He spoke at the Holocaust Memorial Ceremony, and then on the 8th, that's when he said he'll halt shipment of weapons to Israel, but now he's going to get judged by the 8th king. Okay, so back to the future prophecies. So we already know about the 9/11 prophecies and Back to the Future, and I did a video on this. But then I saw this a while ago that in the first movie, first Back to the Future, we have Red the drunk sleeping on the bench, okay, at the end of the movie. And it's interesting because the bench is talking about California raisins, but the way Red is drinking, you could only read racy, Raisi, and I thought that was interesting because it connected to the president of Iran. So I think that's another prophecy in that movie. And so, because it's when Marty's returning back to his time frame, um, and the scene starts with a helicopter in the sky. So a helicopter, Racy died with a helicopter. The helicopter shines its light on the broken clock, and so I think that's a picture of how we're nearing the end of time. And then it also shines its light on the bench where Red is, sleeping drunk. And like I said, the bench says racy. Okay. And then what we have is Marty goes back to the mall. Now it's called the Lone Pie Mall at 1:33 a.m. Okay. So I think that's pictures of 1335. I mean, Marty has 5 letters in his name, and so him standing next to the sign is 1335. So we're approaching the 1335 time frame. And so we read about 1335 in Daniel 12:12. It says, how blessed he who keeps waiting and attains to the 1335 days. But as for you, go your way to the end, then you will enter into rest and rise again for your allotted portion at the end of the age. So I thought that was really neat. So then here's the verses that talk about time times half a time, which I think connect to 42 months for Biden, or 3.5 years. Okay, time times half a time. But half a time could also connect to like dividing of time, the Civil War. So he will speak out against the Most High and wear down the saints of the Highest One, and he will intend to make alterations in times and in law, and they will be given into his hand for time times and half a time. And then in Daniel 12, it says, I heard the man dressed in linen who was above the waters of the river as he raised his right hand left toward heaven and swore by him who lives forever that it would be for time times and half a time. And as soon as they finish shattering the power of the holy people, all these events will be completed. So I don't know if we can consider kind of what happened on the 30th, the shattering um of the power of the holy people. Of course, that, I guess when you say holy people, it's really talking about God's people. I mean, so Biden has already kind of shattered the power of God's people. Um, but I don't know how much more, like, he's gonna, oppress what happens in Israel before the end time. Um, but when as soon as they finish this, then all these events will be completed. Um, and so Biden's the beast from the sea with 10 heads.